how wire is a reactive in nature. Okay, so let's go to our VS Code, and we are referring the same demo that we have used in previous video. You might have think like, why I'm using a hard-coded ID if I already have a user ID available, right? So let's replace this ID and see what will happen. So I'll replace this ID. I'll say this dot user ID and this dot user ID, and let's deploy this. Now it should be dynamic, right? So on load, ID will come and the user ID will get the ID, and this record ID should have that user ID. And let's go to our org. Let's refresh the page. And now you see we got the error, and it says cannot read property user ID of undefined. So why it's so? Let's go to code and let's try to understand what's happening. So when we are importing something from a module, and in this case we are importing ID from a module user / ID Salesforce user, that is a asynchronous process, right? It's going and fetching that ID, and before this ID comes, it triggers the get record adapter. Basically it called the get record method, and that time user ID was undefined, and this method expects some ID to be passed. That's why it throws an error. So how to solve this issue actually? And to solve this issue, we have an approach by which we prove wire is reactive in nature. Reactive means once the data available, immediately update it. Okay, so to make this property a reactive, we have to use a dollar in front of the property. Just remember, maximum time people do the mistake, they will write dollar this dot user ID. When we make a property as is reactive, we'll say dollar and the property name without this, and it should be in the quotes. And we call the wire service reactive in part because it supports reactive variables, and we are prefixed with dollar. And if a reactive variable change, the wire service provision the new data. So as soon as that it comes, it immediately hits and bring the data. So let's deploy and see how our reactive properties are working. And if it works, it proves wire service is a reactive in nature because its properties are reactive. The time it gets the value, immediately it fetches the data. So let's go back to our org and refresh the page. And now you see it started working. And this is how we use reactive variables in the wire service. And now this approach also we're gonna use heavily with the record IDs because our record we will fetch the so many record IDs dynamically and we'll assign those IDs dynamically. And this adapter we import from UI object info API module. So let's see when we use this adapter. We use this adapter whenever we want to fetch the metadata about a specific object, and this adapter response include metadata that tells us about the object's field, of child relationships, record type, themes, and many more. So the syntax is almost same that we have seen in the wire syntax, wire service syntax. So first we have to import the wire, then we have to import the adapter. In this case, the getobjectinfo is our adapter name, and we are importing that adapter from UI object info API module. Then we'll pass that adapter name to a wire service. As wire service expects some wire configuration as well, like adapter configuration. And here we have to pass the object API name that tells this adapter what for which object you have to fetch the metadata. And here we are passing the account object, and to pass that we have to import that reference of the account object, And once the data comes, you can cache the data either in the property or a function. So let's back to our editor and let's create a new component called getobjectinfo demo. So now our component is ready. We'll follow the same steps that we know. We need a wire service. We'll call the wire service here. Wire service need an adapter. So we import the adapter and we are learning the adapter getObjectInfo. So we'll import that getObjectInfo from module called Lightning / UI Object Info API. Once the adapter is available, we'll pass that adapter to a wire service. These adapters need some adapter configuration, and that configuration is the object API name that tells this adapter for which object you have to bring the metadata. So we'll pass the account object, and for this we have to bring the reference of the account object, and we can bring the reference using Salesforce schema module. Schema / account, we can say. So this is our account. We get the reference, we are passing the reference, and to hold the data we either to use a wire as a property or a function. And the easiest way I told you in the debugging or to visualize the data, always first write the wire as a function. So we'll write object info is my function name. That function either will receive data or the error, and will print if data is there, print the data. If error is there, print the error. And let's add the configuration as well. So we'll change this is exposed to true. We'll add the targets and we'll change it to app page. Right now we are testing against app page. We have the code. Right now we don't have anything in HTML. Let's quickly add the card here. So I'll create a card, lightning card, title get record info adapter, and we will add some padding around the card, and let's deploy this. Component is deployed. Let's place the component to our page. Wire services, it page. Let's search for our component name, get object info demo. Let's place it to the second column. Let's save this. Let's go back. Card is visible on the page. Let's go to the console. And now it's printing one object here. And now you can see it's giving us the whole metadata. What's the API name? What's the child relationship? What's the default record type? What are all the fields this object has? Apart from that, record type infos, theme info, what's the color of the theme, what's the icon URL, and everything you can get in with this single adapter, that is get object info adapter. So for right now we can just print the default record type ID on the screen. So let's go back and say default record type ID, and we'll say this dot record ID equal to data dot default record type ID, and let's initialize this property on the top. Initially it will be undefined because we are not initializing this, and Once the data comes, from the data we'll fetch the default record type ID and map to the property that we have created, and that ID will show on the screen. So let's deploy this and see if we're able to see the default record type ID. And most of the time we use this adapter to fetch the default record type ID because we need this ID to fetch the pick list values. So now it's deployed. Let's go and refresh the page. And now you can see that the ID is printing. And now we can, if we want, we can remove this everything and we can directly use the wire as a property. I'll remove this and we'll say object info dot data dot default record type ID. So it will print the record type ID, and we can see like this, and we'll put this in the div. That's a better thing. And we'll copy once again and paste it below, and we'll say object API name, and here we can say API name. So now we convert our wire as a function to a property because we already tested it was printing in the console, the data is coming and it's fetching the data correctly. So we just change this card to a property now instead of functions. So let's deploy and test whether the API name and the default record type ID is printing on the screen or not. So it's deployed now. Let's go back and refresh the page, and it throws an error, and that's a good error because this is an asynchronous approach, right? It will go and fetch the data, and before fetching this HTML start rendering, and that time default record type ID is not available. So what we can do is we'll wrap this in the template if true directive, and we'll say if object info dot data is available, then only load the template inside this. We'll just move this and let's deploy this. These are the errors that you will face in real time, and these are the solution that you're gonna use. So now it's deployed. Let's go and refresh the page again. And now you can see that default record type ID is coming correctly and the object API name is account. So just a quick recap, like get object info we only use to fetch the object's metadata, and we're gonna use this adapter heavily for the pick list where we need to have the get default record type ID. We use to fetch the metadata of a single object, and we use get object infos when we want to fetch the metadata for multiple objects in a single component. And it works in the same way, but this gives a freedom for us to fetch the metadata for the multiple object. The syntax is almost same except the adapter name. So the adapter name this time will be get objects infos. We'll pass that infos. Earlier we were passing the object API name with a single object. Now we are passing multiple object. So we are using the array bracket. So let's go to the VS Code and see how it works. We'll use the same code or the component that we used in the previous video. So this time first we'll import this get object infos, that is our adapter name. Then what we're gonna do is we'll create a wire service. In wire we'll pass the get object infos. Then we will call the object API name, and we'll import another object. We can call it as opportunity object from @Salesforce schema / opportunity. So now we have two objects. Let's create another field called object API names, and we'll map those imported object references here. and we'll pass this as a reactive property. There is a reason to pass it as a reactive property. There may be a chance the reference of account object is available first, and the later point of time we are getting the reference of opportunity object. It's always good to pass dynamic things as a reactive property. So we are passing it as a reactive property, and we can handle this using the where as a function property. We'll say when the data comes, just check if data is there or not, and in the console can print data. And in the HTML, what we can do is we just create a card, and we'll say the title get object info adapter, and use a div with the class and leave that div empty for time being. So let's deploy this and see whether the data comes for the multiple objects or not. So I already refreshed the page. Now you can see the card is there. Let's go to console, and in console let's see the object that we are printing. Now it's giving us the two objects, one for account. Now you can see API name account. The second object is for API opportunity, and from here you will get the same metadata that we were getting using for a individual object using get object info wire adapter, but we are using here the get object infos, so we are getting multiple objects basically. So let's go and use this and show on the screen the data that is coming. So we can store this data into a variable or the local property. I'll say object infos, and I'll store this in the this dot object infos equal to data, and we'll go to the HTML. And in the HTML what we can do is, if you see here, basically result is an array. So if something is in the array format, we can run the loop on the template. So here we'll run the loop. Now we'll say template for each, and you have the property object infos. Run the loop on the object infos dot result, and that is result, I guess. Results, you can copy the name. Results, run the loop on this. Each item, we'll call it as obj object, and then what we're gonna do is we'll create a div, and within this div we'll create another div. We'll say object API name, and we'll say obj dot result dot API name, and it's showing error because we haven't used a key property that is important for the for each loop. And we'll say this is our key name, or we can use the API name because API name will always be unique as our key. We'll copy this and we'll print the default record type as well, and for that also it will be under the result. And the time it loads, that time the object infos dot result will not be available, so it's better we use the if true directive as well. So we are telling run the loop only if the data is available in the object infos property. This is the local property we are using. Don't confuse with the adapter name. Adapter name is starting with get. So adapter name is get object infos. Object info is the property that we are using to store the data that is coming from the wire adapter. So let's deploy now. It's deployed now. I refresh the page, and now you can see it's repeating two times. First object API name is account, then record type ID, then second object API name is opportunity, and the record type ID. So this is how we fetch the multiple data, metadata basically for multiple object, and for that we use get object infos. So that's it for this video. I'll see you in the next video.